Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1138 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Deep freaking breaths. I totally understand that there are some fans, potentially a lot of fans, that don't like to be teased. It seems like with any reveal, yes, we get answers to some things, sometimes, maybe. But generally speaking, every single reveal adds more questions than we had before. We're getting both closer and farther from an answer. But there's a kind of famous quote related to this from Aristotle. The more you know, the more you realize that you don't know. And this is literally playing out in real time in One Piece. So look man, by the end of the story, you can guarantee that we will have the full picture of everything that is relevant to know. Until then, the only thing that we can really do is enjoy the adventure. There is some serious gas in this chapter, and I promise you we will be inhaling that shit. I'm gonna give you guys everything that I know. We will be circling and bolding everything that I think is most important. And even if I don't know, I think holds the answer. But really, my objective today is to just make a theory that I think passes the smell test. But yeah, if you're really impatient and you care only about this, then you can skip ahead to 3250. That's about the time that we start to go all in. But it's probably best to start at the beginning. I think that there are many elements from this chapter that are interrelated in perhaps less obvious ways. We continue with the story of Loki and the members of the Gods' Knights, and Loki comments on the similarities between Figureland Shamrock and Shanks. He says a great pirate and a celestial dragon are opposites in this world. So Shamrock explains the truth, that Shanks is his younger twin brother that he was separated from. He also revealed that at some point in time, Shanks returned to the Holy Land, but decided to stay in what Shamrock calls this filthy world. We know that Goldie Roger found Shanks in a treasure chest in God Valley. And I'm sure I'm not alone with this thought, but it just feels like there's some conspiracy here. Was there a plan to give Shanks to someone like Roger? Or to the pirate world as a whole? Essentially, Shanks was left to fend for himself, maybe not all that different than how Garp parented Luffy. Just left him in the forest and told him to survive. The forest was a metaphorical hell in the same way that the entire world is the metaphorical hell for the Celestial Dragons. Despite the Figureland family being Celestial Dragons, and being, we assume, loyal to both the world government and its leaders, the Gorosei, possibly even Emu, I still see each individual Celestial Dragon family as being personally motivated and hungry for power. It was intriguing to me about how Shamrock framed this whole reveal. He doesn't claim Shanks to be his enemy, and in fact I think he implies that Shanks, like himself, is a god. One who, for whatever stupid reason, wants to be in the underworld, or the regular world. He also mentions how Shanks at some point in time returned to the Holy Land, but we don't get the impression that Shanks fought his family. He simply chose to not live in their world. So there may be some belief or some expectation that at some point in time, Shanks is going to join them. I'm not saying that it is actually going to happen, but it could be the plan. Garling appears to me to be somebody who is hungry for power. So for his son to rule over the pirate world could be seen as a means of acquiring it. But yeah, the fact that Shanks is a celestial dragon, and now it's confirmed that he knows that he is a celestial dragon, I think that this is going to end up becoming a very important part of his story. We know that when Shanks was a kid, and when he traveled with the Roger Pirates, that he wanted to find the One Piece, and that he wanted to follow in Gold Roger's footsteps. He even made this promise to Buggy, but then sometime later that plan changed. And I think that this change coincides with Shanks learning of his true heritage. So look, central to all of this is the existence of Joy Boy and of Nika. It seems telegraphed to me that Roger, like many other people in the world, was sort of awaiting the day that the Sun God or Joy Boy or Nika returned. So to follow in Roger's footsteps is to essentially become Joy Boy. So kind of like the Giants of Elbaf, as Shanks was traveling with Roger, I believe that a dream sort of manifested itself that Shanks would be the guy that Roger couldn't have been. Inherited will, yada yada, Shanks wanted to finish what Roger started. And if you go back to Odin's flashback, this is something that Roger just acknowledges out loud. From all the knowledge that they had gained, he realized that somebody will be born and eventually surpass us. And then Rayleigh's like, I wonder who this will be. I wonder who will find the One Piece. To which Roger responds, it'll be my son, of course. And this phrasing is very interesting, because a common theme in One Piece and something that was specifically discussed in this chapter is the nature of family. Sanji is genetically related to the Vinsmoke, Judge Vinsmoke is technically his father, but the reality is that for Sanji, Zeph is his father. So in this conversation with Rayleigh and Roger, Roger's like, well, my son is going to be the one to find the One Piece, and Rayleigh responds, well, you don't have one. And Roger said, but I will, just you wait. Honestly, if you think about this too much, it could make you sad. So an open-ended question to you guys. Who is Shanks' father? The literal answer is Garling, but this isn't what family means in the story of One Piece. So for Shanks, his father is probably Gold D. Roger. Roger raised him, Roger looked after him, and Roger loved him. If you parallel Sanji and Shanks as both being related genetically to royalty, then Roger is Shanks' Zeph. So technically, when Roger said that it would be his son, of course, that would find the One Piece, hypothetically, he could have been referring to Shanks, or Buggy for that matter, and I would argue that he should have, because even though he ended up being the father of Ace, genetically, Roger was also never actually Ace's father, in the spirit of what that actually is. Something that Ace clearly understood, because for Ace, his father was either Garp or Whitebeard. But yeah, Roger had it backwards, because he clearly did not believe Shanks to be his son. He said he didn't have one. I think that, generally speaking, the community likes to believe that had Roger been born in the next generation, that Roger could have been Luffy, essentially, and become the sun god in Nika and save the world. Like, Roger and Luffy are basically the same person. But in some ways, they are different. And in some ways, I wonder whether Roger was missing some things. The story of Whitebeard and Odin also came up in Odin's flashback. And from that and other instances involving Whitebeard, you get a picture of how Whitebeard perceived family. Odin was his son, and Whitebeard claimed him, along with everybody else. So it ended up being a big deal for Roger to meet Whitebeard and ask for Odin to join him. For Whitebeard, it was a little bit of a betrayal. But the contrast here between Whitebeard and Roger makes me think that maybe Roger might have been missing something that Whitebeard had or knew, or philosophically believed in. Kind of like it was a betrayal for Odin to leave Whitebeard to go join his enemy Roger. You can also perceive it as a betrayal, that Roger didn't acknowledge Shanks or Buggy as his sons. Honestly, I think in the same circumstances, Luffy would have done that, because Luffy's view of family is much more similar to Whitebeard, which he directly expressed in this chapter, just basically assuming that the Roger Pirates were Shanks' family. But anyway, in Marineford, Whitebeard, I think, effectively spells out what Roger's criteria was. We know through Whitebeard and others that Roger was waiting for somebody. And in one of his final moments, Whitebeard has a thought that it certainly wasn't Marshall D. Teach. For this thought to make sense, there must be some reason Whitebeard had to think that Marshall D. Teach could have been the person that Roger was waiting for. The obvious answer for the connection here is the D initial. I believe that Roger knew that somebody bearing the initial of D would become the next Joy Boy. And I think that frankly, it is kind of a shame that Roger viewed genetics to be crucial. He saw inheriting the initial D as being a genetic thing, which is why his son would be the one to do it. And most likely why Roger chose for his wife, Port-Gau's D Rouge, to also be of the D family. One of the very last things that Roger did before he died was make a child, a quote-unquote pure-blooded D. So Roger, very similar perhaps to the Giants of Elbaf, seems to be influenced by this prophecy and is attempting to make it reality. And pure blood matters. But in it, I think that it implies a fundamental misunderstanding of what family really is. And I would guess that the person who suffered most because of this was Shanks. Roger unintentionally stepped all over Shanks' dreams. So when we get that scene where the Roger Pirates return and Shanks meets him and Shanks asks Roger a question and cries, literally Shanks could have asked him whether or not he was actually a celestial dragon. Maybe while Shanks and the Roger Pirates were separated, that is when Shanks discovered that he was a Figureland. And so he went back to Roger to perhaps try and confirm it. And Roger did. I mean, we should be honest, Roger was familiar with Figureland Garling. Roger was present in God Valley. Given the similar appearances between Garling and Shanks, you could conclude a relationship, even if you don't actually know. This could also even relate to recent chapters in Elbaf. Shamrock is literally asking Loki to become a member of the God's Knights and become a god, become a celestial dragon. And Loki says, do you really expect anyone on the planet to willingly become scum like that? Well, as it turns out, this is something that Shanks most likely went through, unwillingly. And with the knowledge that somebody of the family D is most likely going to follow in Roger's footsteps and surpass him, become Joy Boy, and Shanks literally being a celestial dragon by blood, and being raised by the Roger Pirates, and Roger who clearly believes in genetic blood. Now Shanks is disqualified from achieving what he wants most, his dream. Even more than that, Shanks may also believe that it makes him and Roger fated enemies, because as Corazon explains, D are the enemy of gods. If you believe in blood, then Shanks is a god whether he likes it or not. This could also explain why Shanks is seemingly positioning himself to become an enemy to Luffy. He views this blood as destiny. He is a god. The D are fated to be his enemy, and that would include Luffy. But yeah, I suppose I just want to highlight how complex I think that this relationship is and how much it potentially affects Shanks. I think that we would have a very different story if Shanks just decided that he was Gold Roger's son and therefore also possessed a D. Nothing was stopping him from adopting a name of his choosing, just like Ace. Honestly, I would want a Shanks-Shamrock fight, but I don't think that we're gonna get that. How satisfying would it be for Shanks to essentially prove that he is the stronger figurehead? This is actually one of my critiques going back to Whole Cake Island. One thing that I just wanted as we were reading the arc is for Sanji to definitively prove that he was the strongest brother. But that also didn't really happen. For all the nothing that the Vincemilk family gave to Sanji, in the end he still couldn't abandon them. Maybe Shanks is similar. In the chapter we got introduced to some of Shamrock's powers, or I guess more specifically the power of his sword. And we find out that the thing can transform into Cerberus. So look, it isn't directly explained in the chapter how this sword has this power, but I think just like intuitively, we should assume that the sword has eaten a mythical zone devil fruit. My logic here is pretty simple. Oda has already introduced the concept of objects eating devil fruit. That is present in the story, and in the examples that we are aware of every single time it's a zone. So it's natural to assume this idea taken to its full potential means that there should be an object that eats a mythical zone devil fruit. At some point, we will get that in the story. Otherwise, it would be wasted potential. And I think that some characteristics of the Cerberus or the sword reflect this. Like, we understand that when a person eats a zone devil fruit, that they can transform directly into the creature, or they can maintain their human form, or they can exist in some sort of middle ground. And the sword seems to be doing that, where each of the Cerberus heads is spawning a sword in its mouth. So like Chopper is both a human and a reindeer, the sword is both a sword and Cerberus. Seems like a hybrid transformation. But for sure it's a little bit weird and ambiguous, because we get a moment in the chapter where, like, the heads of Cerberus separate from the sword itself. Shamrock recalls the sword back to him, but then the Cerberus heads are just like existing outside. But the way that it makes sense to me is to view Cerberus as a guardian of the gates of hell, which is fitting on a number of levels because we've already seen what the Gorosei are, what Emu is. They're like demons. Emu might be the devil itself. And so Shamrock having the sword of Cerberus, also literally being the leader of the God's Knights, is a protector of hell. And when I saw the Cerberus head separating from the sword, my literal first thought was Brook, who can do something somewhat similar. If we assume that the sword has eaten a mythical zone devil fruit, we already know through other mythical zones that they possess attributes and abilities that might be reminiscent of Logia's or Paramecia's. So the Cerberus fruit could have a spiritual aspect perhaps that would remind you of Brook. Really what Cerberus's job was in Hades or in Hell was to enforce the rules of the underworld. He prevented the souls of the deceased from leaving and prevented the living from entering. So in order for this to make sense, Cerberus needed some ability to control the souls of the dead. Another power also commonly attributed to Cerberus was poison or venom. One thing that a lot of pop culture kind of glosses over when it comes to Cerberus is that in like the original depictions, there was like a mane of snakes. Cerberus was accompanied by snakes. And in some respects, One Piece might have captured this better because of the presence of the sword. But due to the snake, Cerberus was venomous. And I think that this is likely going to be proven true in One Piece. Because as Shamrock and Gunko leave, the Cerberus heads remain. Loki promises vengeance on Shamrock. And Shamrock says, well, if you survive this, then, feel free, buddy. But then the swords attack Loki. And his reaction basically says it for you. These swords are more dangerous than just simply being swords. And honestly, this has crazy implications for the entire arc of Elbaf. Because like from the very beginning, and when we first got introduced to the idea of Loki, there was just a baseline assumption that Loki would be Luffy's enemy. Not so fast. Now Luffy has the opportunity, I think that it's just straight up going to happen. He is going to save Loki's life. In order to do this, he must free Loki from his chains, thereby potentially enraging the entire country of Elbaf, which is just peak drama, let me just say that up front. It's also cool to think about Loki as like literally the sun god. I know that Luffy is the sun god and not Loki, but there's many things probably in Loki's life which leads him to believe this. So Luffy's already gone through this arc of being poisoned where he should have died, but he survived. so the parallel here might be very purposeful, assuming that Loki just does not automatically heal once you remove the Sea Stone handcuffs. The Sea Stone is most probably limiting his access to his fruit, which is likely the legendary double fruit of Elbaf, and in my opinion likely to be a mythical zone, which could have just the same as Cerberus, all sorts of magical properties to it similar to Paramecia or Logia's, meaning Loki could potentially just be immune to all poisons the moment that you take the Sea Stone cuffs off. Potentially. Still wouldn't change the fact that Luffy is probably going to be the one to save him, but would change how you view where events go from here, whether Loki is incapacitated for a time or not. But yeah, another intentional parallel in my opinion is the emphasis or the focus on Shamrock's sword. While Shamrock utilizes a sword that is literally Cerberus, Shanks' sword is called the Griffin. Cerberus and the Griffin are most commonly associated with Greek mythology, and in a lot of ways they are polar opposite entities. While Cerberus is a loyal creature to the god of the underworld Hades and guards the gates of hell, Griffins were seen as noble protectors who guarded gold or treasure. A lot of symbolism suggests that Griffins were guardians of wisdom or the sun itself. The more you dive in, the more obvious it is of why Oda chose to name Shanks' sword Griffin. The Griffin is part eagle and part lion. In many ancient cultures, including Greek, the eagle was often a symbol of the sun or related to solar deities due to its association with the sky and flight, while the lion, on the other hand, was seen as a symbol of strength, often linked to royalty and the earth. The Griffin, which is a combination of these two animals, was seen as embodying both the sun's power and Earth's might, which fits with Shanks' place in this world, as both a celestial dragon and also raised a pirate. It also is heavily associated with the god from Greek mythology, Apollo, who was the sun god. Apollo's chariot, which he drives across the sky, brings the sun each day, and his iconography often includes symbols of both sky and earth. So the Griffin was seen as a symbol of Apollo, or a creature at his service, very much the same as how the Cerberus is seen as a creature at the service of Hades, the god of the underworld. There's also some interpretations that suggest that the Griffin might symbolize the protection of the sun during its nightly journey through the underworld. And all of this fits remarkably well with what we know about Shanks and his relationship with Luffy. Essentially, Shanks is a creature of the underworld who protects the sun. While Apollo brings the sun out, the Griffin protects its light during the night. So basically, Oda is just cooking up a storm here. The Griffin is even more fitting because it's both representative of divinity and of mortality, or humanity. It represents Shanks stupidly well. But yeah, for a more overarching theory, now that we have Shamrock here, and we know that Shamrock and the God's Knights are going to play a pivotal role in Elbaf, I can't help but to think about God Valley. We already know that events in One Piece repeat, they parallel each other, and we know that the defining moment of Garling's life, at least before now, was the battle in God Valley. So Shamrock may play the same role here. Elbaf as a whole might parallel God Valley. Even down to the name itself, God Valley. Elbaf is home to gods. It's ruled over by the sun, and possibly or even probably played that role in the past. And we'll talk about the mural at the end of the chapter eventually, but I think that the mural also advances this notion. I have a sneaking suspicion that at one point in time before the Red Line was there and Mary Joie was created, the Atom was in the past Mary Joie. So if we assume that Elbaf might parallel God Valley, you can add some details to what's going to happen in the future. The important characters in God Valley are Figurlin Garling, the Rocks Pirates, and the Roger Pirates. Shamrock is Garling. Luffy is Roger, or Rocks, potentially, but we would need another notorious pirate to be here, and also potentially a Marine. Guys, it makes a lot of sense to me for Blackbeard to eventually make an appearance in Elbaf, if for no other reason than we assume that a road poneglyph is here. Blackbeard will absolutely need this road poneglyph. Just like Luffy and the Strides, it's the only one he's missing. And I feel like we're running out of arcs for Blackbeard to encounter Luffy to take it so that we can have some sort of duel for Laugh-Tale. Also think that it would be a missed opportunity to not in some way include the Big Mom pirates here in Elbaf, given that Big Mom's story is so interrelated. Blackbeard captured Pudding. But there's been a lot of speculation over the years that Blackbeard will be able to eat not 2 fruit, but 3. He's heavily associated with the number 3. Lots of theories about what this third fruit could be. Ironically, the original most popular idea was that it's a Cerberus fruit. About that. But I feel like the fruit that Blackbeard wants will ultimately end up being Loki's. My belief right now is that Loki has the Nidhogg fruit from Norse mythology. And probably the evidence that I like the most about this is Loki's tattoos, or like wings, which reminds me of Kaido's tattoos and how that was used to guess that he was a dragon. So the Nidhogg is this dragon-like entity, and I don't find it to be a coincidence that the mainsail of Hyruden's ship is a dragon-like entity with his helmet. Also, when Road was cosplaying as the sun god, he wore a skull which is like dragon-like in appearance. I also don't think that it's a coincidence. Again, the mural that we are not going to talk about yet associates what looks like a dragon with the Adam tree. I'll explain this more a little bit later on in the video. We're going to end up talking a lot about demons and angels, or at least talk about it some. But the dragon is interesting because it can be seen as a reflection of both. It has wings like an angel and horns like a demon. The dragon is also associated with fire or flame like the sun. So since we know that Kaido possessed the dragon fruit, it would be fitting to me for the legendary devil fruit of Elbaf that's passed down the royal line to be like the dragon, if it can't literally be the dragon. It also in my mind makes it a prime candidate for a devil fruit that Blackbeard would want, but I suppose more on this later. All I want to say is that it would not surprise me if Blackbeard showed up, perhaps making the events here fit God Valley even more. But yeah, probably for a lot of you listening, that's a little bit much to bite off for right now. But my goal is really to introduce some ideas, some characters that we will discuss more when we get to the mural. Honestly, one of the most difficult things to talk about this chapter is taking what is effectively incoherent information and organizing it in a storytelling manner that makes sense. But yeah, from Gunko, Shamrock, and Loki, we went back to Luffy inside of the giant castle where he met the guards who, surprisingly, Shamrock did not kill. Apparently, they left these guards unconscious. I'm not entirely sure why they would have done that. Maybe Shamrock is a nicer guy than he is letting on. I'm not saying that I believe that. But hey man, Luffy literally said it in the chapter. If Shanks has a brother, he's probably a nice guy too. Literally said that. I'm just saying that if I was a ruthless and evil celestial dragon who believed myself to be a god, then anybody who I wanted to would just be dead. Because why not? So take that how you will. He also left Loki to die and perhaps thought that he would kill Loki, but didn't actually kill him. I don't get the impression that he loves killing, or that we would characterize him as bloodthirsty. I just don't get that feeling. It may end up being more a product of his indifference and his perceived superiority over these other life forms that it's not worth the trouble. But yeah, I think that we should be asking who Shanks' mother is and what kind of person she is. We could have ourselves a situation here very similar to Sanji and the Vinsmoke. But yeah, the main thing that I want to point out here, which we've already talked about, but I want to make sure that it's emphasized. There's a theme developing in the chapter. What is family? Which I believe we should also apply to the end of the chapter. Shanks and Shamrock are legitimately and genetically family. You could even apply this to Loki. Loki, King Harold, and Hyrule are all genetically family. But the middle section of this chapter emphasizes that family does not necessarily mean who you are blood related to. For instance, Loki, Harold, and Hyrule do not seem like family in the traditional sense. For Luffy, I think that you can imagine that Shanks is effectively family. This is certainly true with Nami and Balmir, which is why the name came up. It's just a reminder. I imagine that all of this is going to end up being a very on-point segue to information or speculation regarding the initial D. Jaguar D Sol is literally a giant. It is very unlikely that Jaguar D Sol is blood related to Monkey D Luffy or any other member of the family D, unless you want to trace their lineage back all the way to the first man and woman. Seriously. So kind of like how Luffy became brothers with Ace by sharing a sake cup, or the same I guess is true with Luffy and the Grand Fleet, this thing has a place in history. But yeah, on the same note, in Luffy's opinion, the Roger Pirates are Shanks' family, and as he says this, we get to see the mysterious man in the straw hat, who is very likely to be the same man that we saw in a cover story with Crocus in the middle of Fishman Island. So just to reiterate for effect, right, Luffy is talking about the Roger Pirates, and then we get to see a man who we know probably shared a cup of sake with Crocus. I don't think that you need me to explain this. The likelihood that this character is Scopper Gaban is, at this point, it's like 99%. Oda would have to intentionally troll us, which he will do sometimes. But in this case, just why wouldn't you introduce a member of the Roger Pirates? That fans would love that. That's fan service that we can all get behind. But yeah, just something that I want to point out that I believe to be true following One Piece now for a very long time and kind of seeing it grow over time, and something a lot of people don't acknowledge. I honestly think that the story that Oda is writing today, the arcs that he is writing today and recently, are of higher quality than the pre-time skip. Higher quality not meaning that the post-time skip is better or that you enjoyed it more. More so, I think that the post-time skip is more complex and harder to write. That's a hot take. I know that a lot of people will disagree with that. They'll say, I enjoyed the pre-time skip more, or the pre-time skip is insanely classic. I mean, what's happening now isn't better than it. At best, it is as good as. But the reality in my mind is that as you're writing a story for 25 consecutive years plus, the challenge has gotten greater. Probably the best part about the beginning of the story is its simplicity, fewer characters, and much more emphasis on the tone of the series rather than the details. But when Oda began, and then this is especially true before One Piece popped off, he's essentially throwing at you all of his best ideas that he has generated throughout the course of his entire life. Those ideas run dry, so you have to generate more. Or as it actually works out, you can twist them in new ways. And oftentimes this results in greater complexity. But really what I want to focus on is the characterization of side characters and villains. The depth of Big Mom and Kaido and Doflamingo is insane. You could spend hours talking about each of these characters individually. I think that I personally would struggle talking for hours about Enel or Lucci before we got his cover story or his reintroduction. But yeah, this also applies to side characters. The depth of Pell does not compare at all to the depth of Pedro. Am I right? Talk about Kinemon versus Polly as an example. Or Rebecca and Conus. This is kind of a quote that's thrown at you a lot, but great characters make for a great story. But yeah, we could talk for a while longer. Let's just move on. The whole point of this is that I'm really excited to meet Scopper Gaban. At this point, I have really high expectations for almost any character that is introduced in the story. Any character who really matters. And recently, there have been a lot of characters that really matter. But yeah, meeting Scopper Gaban here just makes a lot of sense and is frankly something that many people have speculated for a very long time. We met Crocus when we entered the Grand Line, we met Rayleigh in the middle of the Grand Line, meeting another new member of the Roger Pirates, one of the OGs, near the end in Elbaf. Oda, please. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain how excited I am about this. One of the things that I have loved the most throughout reading One Piece is basically just like Luffy impressing people that I think are cool. Probably the best example of this is Luffy in Marineford and meeting Whitebeard. Like, bro, I lost my mind. I wanted nothing more than for Luffy to just show out. Full on Bartolomeo notice me, senpai. And I got a very similar feeling with Rayleigh. So as far as I see it, this might be Luffy's last opportunity to meet somebody of the old guard that would actually be impressive. Somebody who is not an enemy. I really hope that Oda cooks us up something delicious. Even if it turns out that we discover that Scopper Gaban has essentially been defeated by life, and now he's a drunken has-been. I mean, that's kind of something shared between Crocus and Rayleigh, is that their adventure ended and it's complicated. The purpose of Luffy meeting them in both instances is, I got the feeling that Luffy re-inspired their hopes for a better future. Could even see something like that, and I would be all for it. And of course, the obligatory question mark, Monkey D, when Scopper Gaban realizes that Luffy is the son of his sworn enemy. Or grandson, my bad, and is also the chosen one. But yeah, it's from here that we start delving into some of the lore. We see Frankie investigating Treasure Tree Adam, which he was motivated to do because all the way back to when we were first introduced to Frankie as the underworld of Water 7. He acquired wood of the Adam Tree through the black market, and eventually used it to build the Thousand Sunny. So naturally, he's curious. Even the first thing that he says is fuel for theories. He says, unbelievable Adam wood as far as the eye can see, and I thought it was meant to be rare. And Ripley responds, wow, I had no idea it was so valuable overseas. Maybe I should be selling some of this on the side. The question to everybody should be obvious. Where exactly is the Adam's wood that is being sold on the black market? How are they acquiring it, and where does it come from? Because it seemingly does not come from Elbaf. Elbaf is a nation which is closed off to the rest of the world, does not allow invaders. Even more than that, they live around the tree, so if there was a place where people were trying to take Adam's wood, they would see that. But Ripley had no idea. So really from this we have two theories, one of which I think is very interesting. The first possibility is that seeds of the Adam tree are grown somewhere. They have a farm for Adam's wood somewhere in the world. Not gonna lie, this idea does not blow me away. I would be asking what is the point? But it's a possibility. But yeah, from this, if we assume it to be true, the question we should be asking is if there's a farm for Adam's wood somewhere in the world, why would they sell the wood on the black market rather than legally? Being sold on the black market implies that the wood was obtained illegally or is illegal to sell. But yeah, the theory that I like more is that the wood that is sold in the black market does in fact come from Treasure Tree Adam in Elbaf, but not where the giants live. Post-Egghead, it has now been confirmed that the world has flooded by 200 meters. I suppose this isn't technically confirmed, but I think that we all know that Treasure Tree Adam, the part that we're actually visiting, and where the giants currently live, is more so the middle of the tree. Half the tree is submerged in water and takes root at the base of the ocean, so a lot of wood could be found underwater. I kind of skipped over this when I mentioned possible parallels between Elbaf and God Valley, but one thing that I expect in Elbaf is just like God Valley, by the conclusion of this arc, there is a real possibility that the island of Elbaf ceases to exist. There are many ways that this could possibly happen, but the idea that I love is that Treasure Tree Adam falls. This works incredibly well with the idea that wood is being harvested from the tree below the water. It is slowly being chopped down. So who's actually doing this? Well, I think an obvious speculation would be the world government, or pirates, or there could be an industry here, but we don't actually see the industry. And whoever is doing this would have to be very, very careful. So quite honestly, there's only one character that we know of in Elbaf who is a suspect at all, and that character is Scopper Gaban, which would be a crazy twist because we're learning all this information from Ripley, and it's kind of implied that probably Scopper Gaban is Ripley's husband, and Colin is their child. So he would have to keep this secret from her. But yeah, if you look at Scopper Gaban in the past, he wields axes, which a lot of people associate with chopping down trees, a fitting weapon for the task. Also, Adam's wood is notorious for how strong it is, so a pretty strong person is the only person capable of harvesting wood of the Adam tree. And I guess we know that it's not the Giants of Elbaf. Maybe some of you out there won't like this. You want to see the Roger Pirates in a particular way. But these are the kind of character angles that I've come to expect for Oda and that I just enjoy. Depth, layers. But even as I speculate this, I'm not actually suggesting that Scopper Gaban is in some way a bad guy. Because we already know that Scopper Gaban, as a member of the Roger Pirates, visited Laughtail and learned the truth of the world. And is also probably intimately familiar with prophecies that other people are not, such as an example, the future prophecy that Treasure Tree Adam will fall. This is just another way that I see the Roger Pirates strewn across the Grand Line, that they learned the truth of the world, and because they could not fulfill this themselves and Roger could not be the one to become Joy Boy, they're kind of lying in wait, and in some cases preparing for the future. So I guess all I'm trying to say is there's a possibility that Scopper Gaban already knows that Treasure Tree Adam will fall, and so assisting it, not necessarily a bad thing to do. Also fitting because a theme of Elbaf itself is how prophecy has influenced the actions of the people that live there, which in this case would be the same for Scopper, trying to fulfill the prophecy. And you could even think about this on a very human level. The island of Elbaf has been fought over for thousands of years, to the point that in the past it was commonly known as Warland. This is something that we now know almost for a fact. Road told us that the island of Elbaf is fought over. This is the source of conflict between the Giants of Elbaf and other tribes of giants. And it is coming up again because Figurlin Shamrock is here, and his objective is the island of Elbaf. Repeat a speculation that we mentioned earlier. I fully believe that before Mary Joie existed, Treasure Tree Adam was effectively the land of gods, at the highest point in the world. So destroying the island could be seen as ending the cycle of violence. People can't fight over what no longer exists. Anyway, at the very least, I find this conversation to be relevant because Frankie himself brought it up. He asked Ripley, "Weren't you here to keep an eye on me?" Saul seemed pretty strict about it. He was all like, "It's a sacred tree, bucko. Don't go cutting it down now, you hear?" And all this plants the idea. Some of this should remind you of Nolan and Kalgara's flashback. That was a flashback, that wasn't a main sequence story event with the Straw Hats. So for the Straw Hats to, like Nolan, eventually cut down sacred trees, it wouldn't shock you. Also, if you really want to overanalyze Nolan and Kalgara's flashback with the sacred trees, the reason Nolan did it is because these trees were infected with disease. The trees were killing the Shandians. And there's something about Elbaf that is worth a warning. Open-ended question, is the treasure tree diseased? Also, a sacred tree being cut down also came up in Wano. Big Mom did that. It was apparently a bad omen. But yeah, from here, Frankie noticed that something strange is painted on the tree face. He said, what's that? It's a mural. And Ripley explains it's graffiti from eons ago. Some kids probably etched right into the bark and it got fossilized. It's now designated as a cultural heritage site thanks to its enormous historical value. Frankie's like, is a punk's doodle that big of a deal? And she continues, it's said to date back somewhere between 900 and 800 years ago. So this was a doodle from the Void Century. Frankie intends to show Robin, but he takes a moment to look at it. So what we see initially with Frankie, we actually get to see in more detail at the very end of the chapter. But I do want to highlight that what Oda chooses to focus on here are 3 characters. Just my general state of mind or mindset is like, why does Oda choose to do anything that he does? So why these 3 characters? When we learn later that there are a lot of characters. Could be significant. But yeah, when we initially see these characters, part of their designs are obscured. But when you look at the mural as a whole, you can see it in its entirety. So the three characters are a mermaid princess, a robot like Emmet, and a mink, I would guess. And Ripley adds an intriguing point, which is, as far as we know, there were definitely times where the races of the world clashed. But this kind of cooperation is unheard of. That's why she thinks that it is probably just a child's dream. So look, two things spring to mind immediately as things to talk about. The first of which is that this is probably not a child's dream, this probably actually occurred. Or will occur. We know that the mermaid princess Poseidon was a friend of Joy Boy. We know that Emmet, the robot, which this looks a lot like, was a friend of Joy Boy. We know that Joy Boy was alive during the Void Century when it's speculated that this drawing was made. So while this could be a depiction of what happens in the future with Luffy, I do think that this has already happened at least once with Joy Boy, although it is forgotten. But yeah, I would guess that the most important thing to glean from this is that even the giants of Elbaf, who live an extraordinarily long time and have knowledge of history that dates back to even before the Void Century, do not seem to be aware of the events of the Void Century almost at all. That's interesting because we know almost for a fact that Elbaf has been untouched by the world government for the last 800 years. So how would the world government and Emu have been able to erase the history from this island? Literally, the giants can live for 400 years. So it is theoretically possible for a giant to have lived before the Void Century, during the entirety of the Void Century, and then some years after. That is a definite possibility. So you would think that this person would know everything. But the giants seem as much in the dark as everybody else. So I'm going to go ahead and mention this theory now because we might bring it up later. But in my opinion, the absolute best theory to explain why the Void Century exists. Explain how it's possible that history and memory seems to have been wiped out, 100 years of it, across the world equally, is that this is related to technology of the past, and specifically something made during or before the Void Century, which is similar to Vegapunk's punk records. Vegapunk explained his grand dream for punk records as like a unibrain where everybody in the world would connect to it and share ideas, upload their experiences. I think that Vegapunk's dream was achieved in the past. And at some point, everybody in the world were all connected to this central brain. Specifically how it worked, it's up to Oda and your imaginations, you already know. But I like to view it as a dream world that everybody was connected to. Basically, everybody was living on the internet. So when the technology of the One Piece world was lost, it took something with it. 100 years of history, vanished. But yeah, I suppose another intuitive thought about these drawings is that if you assume that the first character is the mermaid princess Poseidon, then I think that a lot of people might think we might also be looking at the other two ancient weapons. Emmet as potentially like Uranus or Pluton, it's feasible. Honestly, we've already made several theories that one of the ancient weapons could be a non-traditional life form, like something that people would confuse as an object or as a tool or as a weapon, but isn't necessarily the case. And I think that that holds true for Emmet. Emmet is a robot, yes, but Emmet is also a life form. And I think that we can gather that this is true enough because of Emmet's interactions and relationship with Joy Boy. But really, my theory with Emmet is that Emmet is a robot, so what makes Emmet, his personality, his consciousness, might be contained in something like a computer chip. I see no reason that he has to exist in the body that we associate with him. You can unplug him from the giant robot and then perhaps plug him into something else. Think of it like AI. So Emmet, or another creature like Emmet, could literally be the Pluton, or Emu's flying weapon which destroyed Lolosia. From what little we know, the Pluton was a legendary ship, and I think, logically speaking, it's very likely that it was the ship of Joy Boy. But what stops this ship from being alive and having a personality? A literal member of Joy Boy's crew. In my opinion, nothing stops this. It could be true that an AI-type personality like Emmet is needed in order to operate whatever weapon destructive element exists in the ancient weapons like Pluton. An AI life form is the key, but the character that's hardest to place is the last one. The one that we've speculated might be a mink. What do the minks have to do with any ancient weapon? That is unclear. So full disclosure, just my opinion, I don't actually think that this mural is intending to show us all three ancient weapons. That is just my opinion. I think that these are simply important friends of Joy Boy, that each of them had an important role during the Void Century. But if you're going to linger on the possible connection between minks and ancient weapons, the one thing that really stands out to me is Zunisha and the whale tree. We brought up Odin's flashback earlier in the review, so I reread it, and lo and behold, right, something that's easily forgotten is that the whale tree is just weird. Roger and Odin were unnerved in Mokomo Ductum which is something that Momonosuke and Luffy also to some degree felt while they were there. And as this is happening, Oda decides to show us the whale tree in a way which makes you feel like it's alive. Just a lingering mystery. But either way, Zunisha is a creature which, just in my opinion, and we speculated it from like literally the moment that we met it has a power that is comparable to an ancient weapon. This creature can destroy islands without doubt, and there may be more than one. Talking about the shadows in the Florian Triangle. So because Zou in Zunisha is literally the island of the minks, we have at least something to talk about. But yeah, we're getting closer. The scene then flips to the Owl Library. The kids are having a blast, and they pull out the ancient Harley texts, which Robin is like, ooh, don't mind if I do. Let's read it. And pray that we can make some sense of it, and explain it with any logical flow. Honestly, it is hilarious that the Giants of Elbaf acknowledge that there are many different interpretations of the ancient Harley texts, depending on the person. And as we analyze this, right, every person that does this on YouTube or elsewhere is going to be the same. The fact that Oda can accomplish this, that we're treating this as like literally analyzing religious texts, is a huge flex. But yeah, just for the record, I know that a lot of people listen to my videos and don't actually watch them. They treat it like a podcast. So for the record, I'm going to include the images from the chapter while we're discussing this part specifically, just because it makes it easier. So if you're confused as to what I'm talking about or want a visual as I'm talking about it, watch the video. But a detail easily lost is that the Ancient Harley text, or the book that Robin is reading, is just words. And we get to see these words. But the actual images which might accompany it, that seems to be etched on Treasure Tree Adam. Because when we're looking at this image, the character present in the center is Frankie. And we know where Frankie is. So Oda wants us to interpret these two things together. But the drawing does not appear to be in the book. So yeah, the Ancient Harley texts are split into 3 parts. The first world, the second world, and the third world, coinciding with the known destruction of the world in the past, first world and second world, and the third world is said to be our current world, where this story presumably reaches its conclusion. Also bear in mind that translation could not be any more important, so I will be reading and waiting for the official translation, but we'll go with what we know. So I want to begin with the first world. The earth burned in endless flame, and in the hearts of men burned with desire. From whispered prayers, the sun god rose, beckoned by the enslaved who reached for the forbidden star, also translated as the forbidden sun. The god of the land was enraged. With a serpent of fire, they cast the world into ruin. Darkness fell, death reigned. They would not meet again. So the first line repeated, the earth burned in endless flame. Another translation of endless flame could be eternal flame, something Vegapunk brought up in Egghead. I also like this interpretation because it said that the sun god rose, beckoned by the enslaved who reached for the forbidden star or sun. Forbidden sun. Vegapunk compared the eternal flame to the power of the sun. This power potentially being forbidden would make a lot of sense. So from these 2 lines alone, my very strong opinion is that it is in the first world that technology started to blossom in the world of One Piece. The world discovered this incredible source of energy. But why is it called the Forbidden Sun? There's a lot of commentary nowadays about how the advancement of technology and society in the real world has us playing God. Genetic engineering, changing the very things that make us who we are, potentially in targeted ways. Artificial life forms. With synthetic biology, humans can create new organisms in labs, so we are literally creating life. There's climate engineering, proposals like solar geoengineering, spraying particles into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight, are ways that we could control global climate patterns. Similar to how, historically, the Divinity have control over the weather. It was not a power of man. Through biomedical advances, things like immortality or longevity, people attempt mind uploading, transferring human consciousness into a digital form. We have technology which allows for global surveillance, similar to God, omnipresent, always watching, and we can even manipulate reality, such as virtual reality. The point is that as technology advances, we potentially usurp the role or the purpose of God. And as gods are mentioned commonly throughout the Harley text, this could be something seen as forbidden. But let's return to the first world. The earth burned in endless flame, and in the hearts of men burned with desire. A synonym of desire, which is possibly appropriate here, is ambition. Ambition is also highly related to technology. Some technologies open up a whole new world to adventure. Desire is the fuel of progress, and the pursuit of progress allows for individual accomplishments, which drives our motivation to go forward. But in One Piece, desire is also something that we should now heavily associate with the devil fruit. That's how Vegapunk chose to explain it. The devil fruit are desires incarnate. I also believe that the devil fruit are a product of technology. They're not this natural magical element of the world of One Piece. They did not always exist. So along with the invention of the eternal flame, I think that the first world was where devil fruits were first created. And this, I believe, is a great explanation for this next line. From whispered prayers, the sun god rose, beckoned by the enslaved who reached for the forbidden sun. So bear with me for a moment, right? The devil fruits are literally created because of people's, humanity's, whatever, their desires or their dreams or their wishes. Somebody out there was incredibly dirty and just wished that there was a way that they would always be clean. And thus the soap fruit spawns. So on and so forth for every devil fruit. Just as a side note, I personally believe it's not one person's dream or desire, but a lot of people's same dream or desire. It takes a lot of wishing to make a devil fruit. So while the first world might have been the most technologically advanced world, or where the technology came from, it doesn't mean that it was a just world. We know that there were enslaved, but these enslaved could also contribute to the creation of devil fruits. So I will repeat, from whispered prayers, the sun god rose. I think that this is talking about the creation of the Nika fruit. The enslaved created a deity that would one day save them. This could even be something that the slaves or the oppressed did on purpose, if they were aware of the technology of the first world, if they were aware that devil fruits spawned because of desire. If all of this is related to the eternal flame, then they may have looked to the eternal flame to provide them salvation, because they knew it was possible. Even some of the specific wording I think works well. The sun god was beckoned by the enslaved who reached for the forbidden sun. The eternal flame is this magical energy source that can do essentially anything. At this point, it would be easy to believe that the people of the first world believed anything was possible, quite literally. The people looked to the eternal flame. They reached for it to call forth or beckon their savior. But at this point, I need to explain a theory. The theory that we essentially already have involving devil fruit is it essentially involves the spirits of the deceased. While smile is different from actual devil fruits, and we will find out the precise way in which they are different, it's also, I think, intuitive to presume that there's clues about devil fruits, that how they are grown through smile. So the first important ingredient is from Caesar Clown, and he created the chemical SAD, or SAD. We also know that Caesar Clown is essentially a knockoff of Vegapunk. Great scientist and all that yada yada, but his work is based off of Vegapunk's. So what was Vegapunk's big discovery? That was the lineage factor, the secret of life, which when explained to us and shown to us looks a lot like DNA. But I don't think that you should think about this as DNA as we currently understand it. As an example, we have cloning in the world of One Piece. The Seraphim are clones of warlords, but it's also explained to us that the Seraphim retain some elements of the actual original person's experiences. And as an example, Boa Hancock seems to have some affinity for Luffy that she doesn't really understand. Talking about the Seraphim Boa Hancock. So my belief is that the difference between a lineage factor and DNA as we understand it is that it incorporates elements of the soul. The lineage factor is somebody's soul, or possesses a reflection of that. Your experience is potentially what you want. Who you are is engraved. And I want to make this clear, this is not just a One Piece idea, this is a real-world philosophy, a new age philosophy. Many people are blending science and spirituality, where DNA is not just seen as a biological blueprint, but also as a carrier of spiritual information or energy. As an example, you and I and everyone possess a lot of what is referred to as junk DNA. DNA which doesn't appear to do anything. We don't understand its purpose. In fact, very little of our DNA actually seems to be used. But some have reinterpreted that to suggest that this junk DNA might hold dormant spiritual abilities or memories from past lives or ancestors. All of this to say that I think that the chemical Caesar Clan created, SAD, is related to lineage factor, DNA, and the soul. More specifically, I believe that he killed animals and extracted this substance. So looking at the absurd case of Hold'em, right? Hold'em is literally two entities now, where he has a lion of its own brain and personality just attached to his stomach. You can see how the smile fruit might be related to cloning or DNA. But outside of Caesar Clown's technology, the normal way in which this substance, lineage factor, soul, or whatever would be found is through regular old death. But yeah, the whole process of creating smile was that you would take the chemical SAD, you would pump it into regular streams of water, which were then absorbed by trees under the light of bioluminescent sunflowers. The trees would then produce artificial fruit. So the key takeaway of this theory is that it is the souls of the dead absorbed by trees, which produces devil fruit. Also a concept that we have already seen introduced in One Piece through Jaya and Nolan and Kalgra's flashback. They believe that they're sacred trees, held the souls of their ancestors. Now I want to flip over to the mural. We see what appears to be a city under siege, potentially at war. At least there's a big-ass monster. Smoke rises from the buildings, and we see people fleeing or leaving the city. We can follow their path as they head deep within the world, disappearing into flame. And a very important detail here, on what appears to be the surface of the land next to the city, there is nothing above their heads. But as they start going deep into the world, suddenly they have what appears to be a halo. I think that this is meant to convey that these people have died. Their spirits are going to the underworld. But the adventure of these people does not end there. We can see what appears to be people coming up back from the flames. This time they do not have halos. Instead, they're holding this object. So there's lots of minutia to discuss here. Are these people, are these all the bad people that went to hell? Is this everybody who died? Are they being reincarnated? It's up for you to decide. But my favorite interpretation right now is that the things that they are holding as they come back up to the surface are their dreams or desires. So everywhere you see this substance on the mural, I believe, is a dream or desire. So in the center of the mural is the tree, which we assume to be Treasure Tree Adam. And Oda took the time to draw the roots which descend into the flame, or the underworld. I believe this is how trees, or great trees, naturally, in the world of One Piece, absorb a substance similar to SAD and thus produce devil fruit. Low-key, we're speculating that Adam Tree here is a tree which might produce devil fruit. But another reason why I like to think that these objects are dreams or desires is because the whole scene reminds me a little bit of the Fire Festival. So just as context, right, while Kaido ruled over Wano, Wano was hell. So they were metaphorically beneath the flames. It was just repeated over and over that this is hell. I've been to hell and back already, this is no big deal. So during one day of the year, they wrote their dreams on these lanterns, which they then floated up into the sky. These wishes reached up to the heaven, and in the backdrop you have the night sky and the moon. In my opinion, the very same thing is happening in the mural. People are dying and are being reincarnated with an inherited will, or a dream. They then hold these dreams up to the heavens, where some of them circle around the moon. My opinion is that the creature that we see towering above this city, which seems to be destroyed, is meant to reflect a powerful devil fruit. To me, it's just kind of intuitive that if we're arguing that devil fruit were created during the First World, that this also included all sorts of bad things of substantial power. So to me, it's almost as if this monster rises up from the city itself, perhaps that it is a creation of the city. But I want you to notice that this creature has a stripe, which I'm just going to tell you reminds me a lot of the tattoos that we see on Ripley and King Harold. While at first you might assume that this stripe is like its belly, the stripe eventually goes over its left eye. Oda also strangely decided to draw X's on the monster, for me creating the impression that the monster might also be a map, and literally be the god of the earth, quote unquote. Even the stripe might be seen as some kind of depiction of a road, or straight up the red line. So I just want to make this clear, I interpret the monster in two ways, both as an actual monster attacking the world, but also as a reflection of how potentially technology and warping the earth destroyed the world. And this powerful monster appears to be fighting a dragon, which resides upon the top of the world tree. I believe that the idea is that man now possesses the power of God, and thus the means to fight it. And I think that this also implies that perhaps the original god of the world of One Piece were dragons. Celestial dragons call themselves celestial dragons for a reason. Their symbol is the hoof of the dragon. We see dragon statues in Ryugu Palace and Fishman Island, as well as Onigashima and Wano. The world's government and Vegapunk seemed very interested in recreating them. And we also have Kaido's devil fruit, which is spawned because people wanted a dragon to exist, or become one. My opinion is that dragons were once real, actual creatures, and were the world's strongest creature. Also not a coincidence that Kaido was effectively the god of Wano, as a dragon. And if you think about Wano in the context of this mural, a lot of things add up. I believe that Wano was essentially a reenactment of the First World. So potentially for eons, I think dragons were God. And as an artifact of the past, just the same as today, they lived at the highest point in the world. I also think that Oda included general foreshadowing of this concept with Chopper during the time skip. So Chopper was sent to what was called the Torino Kingdom, an island that some called a treasure island. The island is dominated by this massive tree. The people there are like both primitive and highly advanced. They have a great library, are experts in plant life, and masters of medicine. All of this should remind you of Elbaf. And they are governed by their gods, which are these massive birds which live at the top of the tree. None of this is a coincidence. They call it a treasure island, which I think is very much related to the fact that Elbaf is dominated by Treasure Tree Adam. Why is it called Treasure Tree Adam? Well, based on dragon lore, dragons hoard gold. If dragons were the gods of the world for a very long time, and they lived on top of Adam, then they would be guarding and protecting a vast sum of treasure. Treasure Tree Adam. Also, just as an aside to throw at you back to the Torino Kingdom and Chopper during the time skip, at the top of the tree was where the birds live, and when Chopper was dropped there, he was dropped into a nest with a bunch of chicks and eggs. I believe that the egg on Goldie Roger's ship is a dragon egg, which he acquired from the Heaven Realm in Elbaf, the last dragon. But anyway, to return to the Harley text in the first world, it says that the god of the land was enraged with a serpent of fire that casts the world into ruin. The serpent of fire, in my opinion, is a dragon. I think that basically this was a fight between two gods. There became a god of the earth, or the god of man, a powerful devil fruit user who was akin to a monster, fighting the dragons, or the former gods. But I also just want to speculate or put out there that the serpent of fire could also refer to the red line, because the giants of Elbaf probably refer to the red line as the serpent soaked in blood, related to Norse mythology and Jormungandr, the world serpent. So it could be that in the first world the red line was created, and it could also be related to how the world was destroyed. So I suppose this is my major interpretation of the first world. To get anything more from it, I think that you have to go into even heavier speculation territory, which we're going to do. But just realize that this is a theory. One I personally subscribe to, I believe in, you don't have to. I made an entire theory video about this. I'll include links in the description, right? But we're going to spark note this. I think that the world of the present that we are currently adventuring is built on top of the world of the past that was destroyed. You can think of it as being almost exactly like the island of Water 7 and the island of Wano. Civilization built on top of the ruins of the past, now submerged deep underwater. My theory is that the byproduct of the Mother Flame and the Eternal Flame is the creation of Skycloud, and an ingredient or a part of Skycloud or Sea Stone is lineage factor, DNA, or soul of the deceased. But in the present story in Egghead, we can see that Vegapunk has the Mother Flame, and the Mother Flame appears to be submerged in water. I personally think that the One Piece world reflects actual pirate lore in Davy Jones' locker. This is also related to actual Japanese native mythology. The souls of the deceased reside at the bottom of the ocean. And in part of the mural, you can see what appears to be the ocean and the Noah. This is why it looks like the ocean. And within the ocean, Oda drew an angel. So the sea is the afterlife. This is why, in my opinion, that the sea is also the enemy of devil fruit. The devil fruit containing like the souls of the deceased, their dreams or desires. The sea as the gateway to the underworld is calling these souls back to where they belong. So the way that the Eternal Flame essentially works is you place it in a large body of water like the ocean. It burns. The energy that it's burning is life. The energy of life. That's what makes it the greatest power source. This is why the first line says the earth burned in endless flame. However, as a byproduct, it produced a massive amount of sky cloud, which, given enough time, hypothetically, might eventually cover the entire sky. So the first time that we were introduced to these sky islands, what happened? Well, a vast shadow loomed over Jaya, plunging the world into darkness. Or as it says in the Harley text, darkness fell and death reigned. Even looking more closely at the mural where we see the city, the sky of the city appears to be in darkness, even while we see a sun. I personally think that this is why Sunlight Eve was originally grown, to provide light to a world which was steadily growing black. So if we assume that all of this happened, what would naturally happen next is that people would fight over being able to live in the sky, under the sun, and develop means to survive there until the world before was lost entirely, today existing as a literal hell. I think that this is reflected in the mural. The flames cover the bottom. The world before is lost, and now hell, which I hope that we one day visit, because that would be insanely cool. So before we continue on to the second world, I just want to give you like my general impression of the mural as a whole. Just the same as Japanese, I believe that you are supposed to read it right to left. And I think that it is telling three stories. The first of which is the city, the spark of technology or the flame. Like Prometheus, they stole fire from the gods, leading to great power. Enough power to overthrow the god, which is the dragon on the tree. In my opinion, the second story being told, different from the first, focuses on this king figure which looks a lot like Emu. The king is on a boat, you can see oars, so he's sailing atop the sea below him. And this adds up with the presence of what appears to be the Noah, and I guess more importantly, the pairs of animals that would be on it. But I just want to point this out to you as an aside. Obviously, the king is supposed to be above the ocean, but the ocean has a very strange shape, and the boat kind of blends into the water. If you zoom out a little bit and just look at it as a whole, it looks kind of like an elephant. So possibly Oda is cleverly hiding in here that the king was riding Zunisha, or a Zunisha-like creature to the base of the great tree. With the king's association here in the mural with the Noah, it's possible that the king was tasked with the salvation of the world, following its ruin, taking these creatures and these people to a place where they could live, the tree, which, if you believe in my theory, might be the main place where you would find land up in the sky, now dominated by sky islands. You guys see how that might make sense? Everybody on the surface is trying to escape this world which was steadily becoming hell. So they ventured up into the sky. But the sky, at least initially, would only have so many resources. And there was probably not a limitless way to actually get there. The most straightforward way you would think is climbing the tree, where of course the dragon lived, which also might be the impetus of the war between the dragon and the people. It was guarding its treasure. Thus Elbaf, as Warland, is born, a place everybody is fighting over, the paradise in the sky, or Nakroa, an island of dreams. It might also be related to the Garden of Eden and the Kingdom of Light. Little Garden and Elbaf, right? Even the land of Jaya that went up into the sky is called Upper Yard. There's more to discuss we will get to later, but this leads us to the left side of the mural, where we can see this gigantic demon-looking thing with wings and horns holding a sun. This thing is being attacked by literally everything. We can see samurai, we can see giants, we can see a being like Emmet, minks, people riding whales, Lunarians, Poseidon, potentially Tantara, a ship which might reflect humans in Alabasta, as well as Nika. So here's what I think. We can break down the parts of the mural into ideas. The first is the city or the spark of disaster. The second, with the king, is the consequences of this disaster. The people had to flee their world. And I believe that the third part of the mural reflects the great war that all of this has led to. The battle for the land of the sun god, or Elbaf, paradise on earth, and the oppression of the god which resides there. Again, this is speculative, it's just my gut feeling, but I think that the demon that we see on the left side of the mural is basically the same as the dragon that we see on top of the tree. Not a coincidence, in my opinion, that the demon has both wings and horns, just like a dragon. But it also opens up for the interpretation of this being, this god, as not just a dragon, but as the general form that God takes. So I don't want you to think of the demon as a demon. I want you to think of the demon as the king of the world. This is a dream in the world of One Piece that we know exists. That's what Rox D. Zebek wants, to become the king of the world. Most likely Blackbeard is the same. And this is most likely the title that Emu currently holds. So to go back to our earlier speculations about Blackbeard having interest in Loki's devil fruit, or in general having interest in a fruit which might be reminiscent of a dragon, this mural is why I think that, among many other reasons. The mural depicts the king of the world and shows you what that looks like, holding the power of the sun, with horns and with wings. For those that dream to become the king of the world, this demon is their goal. But yeah, from this, I think it makes it pretty clear of just how much the Giants of Elbaf effed up this whole thing. I think it's supposed to be important that Ripley doesn't actually think that the drawings are that important. She just thinks, oh look, it's just a doodle of a child. Perhaps the Giants are relying exclusively on the words from the Harley text. But they really, like Oda has done here, should put them together. Because I think that it would make it very clear of like, the god of destruction is not Nika. Nika fights them. Yet at the same time, there may be historical reasons for this. The Giants of Elbaf live in Elbaf and have for a very, very, very long time. They are most likely descendant from some group of people or a king who claimed this island, this godland. So the ruler of this tree, at least for a significant period of time, was in fact God, and in the distant past was in fact a dragon. So the leader or the king of the island of Elbaf was the demon. Duh. So when we were introduced to the legendary devil fruit which is passed down the royal line of Elbaf for eons, this could literally be the devil fruit of the sun god. Not Nika, but the demon god who claimed that title. Which, if the person who had this fruit believed themselves to be and others believed them to be the sun god, and you have the sun god Nika, you could see why the Giants might be a little confused. It's kind of fascinating to think of them as sort of caught between two worlds. There are two sun gods, the false destroyer and the laughing savior. One will conquer the world to become its king, and the other will free it. So, choose wisely, I guess. But yeah, how Emu fits into all of this, I think, is entirely open for debate. Emu could literally be an immortal being from the first world. If the first world was where technology started to burgeon, then immortality was a possibility from the first world. This ancient king looks a lot like Emu to me. He has traveled to the foot of the great tree, and you could speculate that he ends up becoming the king of Elbaf, therefore the god. And we are not led to believe that this king is Nika or Joy Boy, although he may want to save his people and the world. So perhaps the king becomes the demon that we see on the left. But I can't say that I have a definitive answer here for exactly what Imu is. This could be the enemy from the beginning, or somebody who took that demon's place from a later generation. But I'm sure that astute listeners up until this point probably have an idea of what I prefer to think, because I think that Blackbeard's goal is to essentially become the demon. And there are other characters as well which reflect this path. Kaido, probably also Loki, meaning the identity of the demon could be different over time. So my actual theory is that following the destruction of the first world, the sun god Nika and others slayed the dragon, giving to the people a new world, a paradise or a sanctuary for all life. But then I think that the sun god Nika died, and I suppose this is the best segue we're going to get into the second world. A breath stirred in the abyss. The god of the forest wove their magic, nurturing its devils, while the sun lit the embers of war. Those of the half-crescent and full moons dreamed, yet the ones who slew the sun defied themselves, evoking the wrath of the sea god. They would not meet again. So I think that the thing which most characterized the second world was humanity's fight over becoming the sun god. The sun lit the embers of war, following the death of the dragons and of Nika. Now power was up for grabs, and it was fought over, an endless struggle to become king of the world. But yeah, we also speculated that devil fruits actually came from the first world. But this line in the second world also seems to refer to devil fruits. The god of the forest wove their magic, nurturing its devils. I think that these two ideas can coexist. Devil fruits spawned in the first world. That's how we get the sun god Nika. But they continue to be produced in the second world. Suddenly, there are a lot of powerful beings. So maybe the best way to highlight this is to look at somebody like Enel. Enel in Skypiea was referred to as God, in part because of his godlike powers granted to him by his devil fruit. I think what this is trying to imply is that as devil fruits proliferated in the second world, many people started to have the power of God and could be worshipped individually, each one then potentially claiming to be the sun god. So this leads me to Imu, sort of. I honestly think that the legendary devil fruit passed down the royal lineage of Elbaf dates back to a really ancient sun god, possibly the first after the fall of the dragon. But eventually there were other fruits that were just as strong, possibly stronger. And I think that Imu has one of these fruits, because I think that he is literally the devil. As an aside, the devil or Lucifer was formerly an angel, so I expect that when we eventually get Imu's design, he will have wings like an angel and horns like a demon. But yeah, just to picture this world for a moment, at some point in time I think that there was multiple sun gods existing in many parts of the world. Everybody claimed to be the sun god. If they had any sort of devil fruit that would be any way reminiscent or powerful enough to defend their territory. Also, races like the minks would make a ton of sense. Sulong transformation, or the fishmen with their steroid. It's how they would become the sun god. So the culmination of the second age leads to all of these sun gods becoming one, Imu, or I suppose three, the sun god Nika, as well as potentially the sun god which remained in Elbaf, the king of the giants. All of this fits remarkably well with this line, yet the ones who slew the sun defied themselves. So they slew the original sun god or the dragon, but then they began to defy themselves. Again here, the translation probably matters, but if you use the word defy literally, it could mean to openly resist or refuse to obey. And it can also mean to challenge. I like to think of it as the world and its people have essentially the same dream, dating all the way back to when the first world was destroyed, which they are undermining by challenging each other to become the ruler of the world. But I just want you to understand that I don't think that the Harley text or this mural fully captures every specific and minute detail of what happened. As an example, we don't get a whole lot of clarity about the ancient kingdom, or how Joy Boy could have been the first pirate. So I'll just add that I have a theory that it ultimately ended up being the Lunarians who won this world war to become the sun god. Potentially a Lunarian with a devil fruit which we would associate with the demon on the left of the mural. But the Lunarians as a whole, all of them reflect the sun god just in their appearance. You have wings, you have fire, you have white hair, and it's also an incredibly powerful race that can survive in any condition. It's perhaps an interesting thought that the Lunarians may never have actually conquered Elbaf. Elbaf remained unconquered. So instead, it's during this time that the Holy Land or God's Land moved from Treasure Tree Adam to the top of the red line. But there's one element of the second world that we have yet to incorporate, and that is the moon. So I'm just going to give you guys what I think. In this prophecy, it's mentioned the half-crescent moon people as well as the full moon people, both of which had dreams. Many people, I presume most people, are going to interpret this as civilizations which came from the moon. This could be true, but it's not precisely what I'm going to speculate. Guys, I think that Elbaf might be the clue to understanding what these two terms mean. And I guess basically to just spell it out, I think that in a lot of cultures across the world, they deify the objects in the sky. So the sun god Nika died after the first age. What do you think that people thought? They didn't think that he died because he's a god. Instead, you can see him up in the sky, the half half-crescent moon. If you think about what that would look like, it looks like a smile. So the half-crescent moon people are the people that believe in Nika. This may also be the family D, and what the D stands for. One of the most OG theories ever is that the D stands for the half moon, or that the D stands for a smile. In this case, both of those really old theories are actually correct simultaneously. So we have potentially the people of the half-crescent moon. So who are the people of the full moon? Guys, I think that the people of the full moon are people who worshipped the sun. The full moon looks a lot like the sun, and obviously reflects its light. The full moon represents the sun god, and this interpretation might date all the way back to when the world was shrouded in darkness. The sun god was a light during the night, just like the moon. So okay, JB, we have people that believe in the moon as the sun god. How is that different from the half-crescent moon people? Well, it's because you have a different interpretation of the very same god. The half-crescent moon people believed in Nika as a god of laughter. The crescent or half moon symbolizes the smile. I think that the people of the full moon believe in Nika, or the sun god, as a god of destruction. This conflict still exists today in Elbaf. People are not entirely sure of who the sun god actually is, or what their nature is. And so this conflict played out during the entirety of the Second World. People fought over the various interpretations of prophecy and what came before. And eventually you settled on two general groups, the sun god of destruction, or the sun god who smiles. So yeah, given my theory that the people personified the moon and potentially deified it, it would then make sense that for people, the various people across the world trying to become the sun god, right, that the moon would be a destination. To be able to visit it might be seen as convening with God. And we can see that reflected in the mural as well. There's like this ship that looks a lot like the Ark Maxim, seemingly flying in the sky. I think that this is meant to represent the people colonizing the moons. I say moons plural because I think that there is more than one, or was at any rate. Look guys, this is kind of hard to miss. It's in between some of the text box for the Harley text, but it appears as if the moon has a moon. It's very hard to see, but it is there. This moon does not exist in the current sky. And just because the text is covering the top of the mural, there's potentially more up in the sky that Oda is withholding from us, because there might also be another moon above it, and it also has the same striping pattern that we see on the monster above the city, which we speculated might refer to the red line. Just to cross my T's and dot my I's here, my actual theory is that with the destruction of the first world, and that's when the red line was created, and everybody sort of escaped the hell that was being created below to the sky islands above. Where did all the land come from? My opinion, it came from destroyed objects in the sky or moons. Oda may be foreshadowing this connection between the thing in the sky and the monster because of the striping pattern. You could potentially think of them as fragmented moons, but we'll get there in a moment. So yeah, to paint a more specific picture just because we can, and you can interpret this differently. At the beginning of the Second World, there was not that much land that people could live on, therefore everybody fought over warland, potentially also the Red Line, which might literally have been created from a destroyed moon, or moons plural. In the text it says death reigns, but it's reigns as in ruled. Not really sure if the wordplay works in Japanese, but reigns is also like rain, the water droplets from the sky. So it could be saying death from the sky, which honestly works in every single way that we have interpreted this. But yeah, the moon in the mural, which may have a moon. If you go back to the model of the solar system that we see in Ohara, there's a moon like this. So we are specifically and possibly or probably wrongly speculating that at one point in time there was many moons, but following the first world there was just two, the moon and the moon's moon. So two moons in the sky and potentially two peoples of different moons. If you have a theological war, it would make sense that you would want to destroy your rival god that you do not believe in, if you are people of the full moon who do not believe in the laughing interpretation. Long story short is only one moon remains in the sky. So I think that the moon's moon was destroyed as well. But yeah, maybe too speculative for a lot of people out there. Just realize that Oda's going to cook up something incredible. The moons are certainly important. It's worth fantasizing about what it could all mean and what actually happened. The only thing that I'm saying with an abundance of confidence is I am pretty sure there was more than one moon in the past and that moons have been destroyed. And I believe that this was the world that Joy Boy was born into 900 years ago. He freed the slaves, became the champion of all races, reminded everybody of who Nika actually was, and led a fight to defeat the gods once again. I like to believe that Imu was a human, simply the person who claimed the power after Nika was gone, and also had the foresight to make himself immortal somehow. But yeah, at this point in time, for people who existed during the Void Century, Nika or Joy Boy would still be a controversial figure, because the end result of the Second World was still the world's destruction. The world flooded, and I'm sure that Nika was at least partly to blame. It should also be kept in mind that the world was at war for an entire age, fighting over who would be the sun god. So the religion of Nika could realistically be seen as a danger. I suppose we haven't yet talked about the symbol of the big circle surrounded by 8 smaller circles. My opinion is that this is an ancient symbol, dating back to the first world, when the world had more moons. The big circle in the center is the Earth, and the little circles are the moons. So potentially, as we see with Kuma, right, and his Nika church, it has this symbol. I think that this was the original symbol for Nika all the way back in the first world. It wasn't the full moon people and the half crescent moon people. This was Nika's symbol because it represented unity, one piece. Nika would bring together the whole world, including all of the moons. But you could imagine how the symbol might lose its importance or its relevance or its understanding in the second world if the moons were destroyed in the first. Suddenly, what this means doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I honestly think that by the time that we got to the Void Century, this symbol could have just represented the dream of One Piece, of world peace, which is why the world government adopted it as its symbol, but separated it from Nika, which now is just a god of destruction to a lot of people. At the same time, we know the culprit of the destruction of the second world. This was the ancient weapons, who were friends of Joy Boy or Nika. So naturally, after the world was destroyed, the people would fear the technology which destroyed it, so they turned it all off. Or possibly it just lost its power. And because of the punk records-like thing that we've speculated exists, suddenly was powered down, and as a consequence, everybody forgot everything. So finally, let's discuss the third world. Chaos reigns, the world drifts into a void. Yet time does not erase the memory of the promised day. Its shadow looms as the voice of the half-moon echoes through the ages. And once more, the sun god shall rise, laughing, dancing, guiding the world to its final act. The sun is reborn, a new dawn will break. Surely, this time, they will meet. So we've avoided explaining this up until now, but the promised day is central to all of this. At the end of the description of every single world, they talk about people meeting or not. So really, I think that the Harley texts tell a very personal story of 2 people. A promise was made that, so far, has yet to be fulfilled. A destined reunion. So how do I begin with this? Well, I guess firstly, in the story of One Piece, there are a lot of promised meetings. You can think about Laboon and Brook. You could think about Yorkie and Brook. Honestly, you might include Roger and Rayleigh. Roger said, "I'm not gonna die, partner," kind of suggesting that he intended or was suggesting one day that they will meet again. Luffy and Shirahoshi have made a promise like this. He is supposed to return one day to show her the surface, which is most likely very similar to a promise Joy Boy made to the original Poseidon, which is why he left a poneglyph of apology. Let's see other examples. Shanks made this promise with Luffy. He gave him the straw hat, "One day when you become a great pirate, then you can meet me." Odin made this promise to Whitebeard, also left unfulfilled, but he intended to return back to the Whitebeard pirates and never did. I suppose Big Mom and Mother Carmel could fit, Noland and Kalgra of course, and I would guess that there are more that I have forgotten. This occurs extremely often in One Piece and is almost definitely foreshadowing to some more ancient story. And I think that we have some idea of what this ancient story is, because I think that the Sea Kings spilled the beans. We learned from them on 2 occasions, with Luffy and with the Roger Pirates. But they await, and the whales await the day that the 2 sovereigns can meet again. And they basically spell it out to us that one of these sovereigns is the ancient weapon Poseidon, currently Shirahoshi, the ruler of the Sea Kings. So yeah, the way that I think about this is basically in the first world, you have 2 characters. Something tragic must have happened, and this prophecy essentially tells their story through the ages of a promised reunion. But the same as all of these examples from the actual story that we've laid out to you, Laboon and Brook and Luffy and Shanks, right? There's always a condition to this promise. They've got to do something first, which clearly never happened. But I would guess that the big promise that was made between the 2 sovereigns in the first world was like world peace or something like that. They would make the One Piece come true. This is why they cannot yet meet. I suppose more specifically, this is my thought. The meeting of the 2 sovereigns occurred during the first world. This is when the promise was made. This is why the translation says they would not meet again. So think of it like one of these characters is Kalgra and the other one is Noland. Kalgra never left his island. Noland is your Joy Boy-like character who has a task to complete before they can meet again. But I chose Noland and Kalgra specifically because it's more interesting than the other examples. Because Noland technically completed his task. He returned to Jaya, but Jaya was gone, and Kalgra with it. In my opinion, this may be some foreshadowing to the destruction of the moons. Perhaps this event made completion of the promise basically impossible. I also have a better idea which we will share shortly. So given this idea of 2 sovereigns fated to one day meet, and this is essentially a reflection of this long-standing promise or prophecy, I think that a lot of people might speculate that the other sovereign is Luffy. I mean, Luffy even made a promise to the current Poseidon Shirahoshi, and Joy Boy probably did the same for the Poseidon that came before. But I'll be honest, I see Luffy more as a conduit here. Luffy, as the sun god Nika, fulfills people's dreams or desires, so he is facilitating the completion of this promise. I don't think that it is necessarily about him, but it's complicated. So again, a more macro or whole view of the Harley text, as well as the mural, is it tells a more specific story than you realize. In my opinion, this story begins with the advancement of technology and man replacing gods. And through 3 worlds, the consequences of this problem has yet to be solved. Essentially, what I'm saying is that the devil fruits are the root of all evil. Since the moment that man had obtained the power of gods, the world was doomed. So I'm not sure if I said this wrong before, but I want to clarify now. I'm not entirely sure that the dragon which rules over the world tree was ever evil, although I do believe that it guarded its treasure. Slaying this dragon might have been a great crime, one justified because humanity had destroyed itself. Metaphorically, they had eaten from the tree of knowledge, and they were cast from paradise, and thus needed to find a new one. So their conflict was possibly a product of circumstance and their own mistakes. So here's my theory, and I think that we'll make it make more sense after I explain it. But I literally think that the cycle of life and death is broken in One Piece. This is the great task which must be accomplished. The devil fruit trap souls on Earth, consumed by their own desire. They cannot reach heaven. Like seriously, man, I do not know how to explain this, but I literally think that the underworld, hell, and heaven are broken after man became God. So like I said earlier, there's an interesting dragon statue around Ryugu Palace. And for a long time, I don't know if this is justified or not. I don't know how to say this or explain this to people who just don't immediately believe it, but there's a lot of association in my mind between the powers of Shirahoshi as the natural king of the Sea Kings and the power of a dragon. So Shirahoshi is a direct descendant of a dragon, very similar to the one that we see on the tree. This interrelates very well with actual Japanese mythology, such as the tale of the lost fishhook. In fact, I'm going to explain to you this story, because to me it's very clearly important, but just follow me. The story begins with 2 brothers, Hodori and Hori, both the sons of a deity who was a descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. It should be pointed out here that Japan is the land of the rising sun, and throughout history they believed their royalty to be descendants of the sun god. Essentially, the sun goddess sent her grandson down to the earth to pacify and rule over the land. So Amaterasu is literally the sun, and Amaterasu's grandson is the king of the world, the lineage which I think eventually becomes the dragon. And the sun goddess gave him 3 sacred treasures to help him accomplish this task: Yata no Kagami, Yasakani no Magatama, and the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which are your parallels to the ancient weapons. So this god traveled down to the earth and married the goddess of Mount Fuji, their union producing offspring, including Hodori and Hori. But this is essentially the Japanese imperial line, direct descendants of these gods. So Hodori and Hori are 2 princes. I want you to think about this specific chapter of One Piece, which emphasized the relationship between Shamrock and Shanks, 2 brothers, 2 princes. You should also be thinking about Loki and Hiruden, 2 brothers, 2 princes. And you should also think about Buggy and Shanks. Buggy came up in the chapter as well, and we've already speculated that both Buggy and Shanks were the sons of Goldie Roger. Hodori was skilled at fishing, while Hori was adept at hunting, so the brothers are characterized as opposites. They each had magical tools. Hodori had a magical fishhook, and Hori had a miraculous bow and arrows. But this story begins with a challenge, which should make you think about the giants of Elbaf, for instance Dory and Brogy, who caught the largest sea king. One day, Hodori challenged Hori to exchange their roles and tools. The long story short here is that Hori was not very good at fishing and lost the magical fishhook in the sea. Hodori did not like that. Grieving over his brother's anger, Hori sought help. He found an old man on a beach. This was the old man of the sea. This man crafted a basket for him so that he could set out to sail on the ocean. The basket sank, leading Hori to the underworld, the land of the dragon god of the sea, Waratsumi, or Ryugu. So one brother stays on the surface and the other brother travels to the underworld. Shamrock is the god, Shanks is in the underworld. Hiruden is the good brother, Loki travels to the underworld. In both cases, the brothers are at odds. This also applies to Buggy and Shanks. As Luffy suggests in the chapter, like, the Roger Pirates are his family, except Buggy, I guess. But no, Buggy is Shanks' brother. They just disagree on everything. But as it turns out, the underworld was a friendly place, which is also reflected in One Piece. Shanks likes the underworld. Loki likes the underworld. They have made friends here. Hori met the dragon god of the sea and asked him to help him find the lost fishhook, which he commanded all the sea creatures and they were able to do. The dragon god of the sea even let him marry his daughter, Toyotama Hime, otherwise named as Otohime. So honestly, Hori was having a blast in the underworld in the realm of the dragon god of the sea and kind of lost track of time. Eventually years passed. The fishhook totally forgotten. But eventually Princess Otohime was pregnant with a child, and Hori was warned, don't look at the princess while she is giving birth. But he decided to do that anyway, only to discover that as the daughter of the dragon god of the sea, she was in fact a dragon. She was deeply ashamed with the reveal of this truth, and so from this moment on, they would never meet again. Hori took his son and traveled back to the surface, leaving behind the family that he had found there, going on to found the Imperial Japanese line. So there is a dragon in the sea, and I think that through Hori, you have the dragon on the tree in the mural, the true king of the world. Basically, I think that this is a story of finding God, because God has been lost. You can think about the promised day or the fated reunion as being a very personal story, and certainly this story is repeated often with actual characters. But I see it as a reunion of heaven and earth. The true king of the world, just the same as in Japan, is a descendant of the dragon god of the sea and also of the sun in Amaterasu. This person is the dragon in the mural. But Earth is not simply heaven. Earth is both heaven and hell. The dragon is family with both. So I interpret this as a story about accepting death, which the people of the first world defied. In their attempts to make the world heaven, the value of the underworld was lost. So translated into a story about One Piece, I think that there were two important brother characters in the first world. At first, best friends and rivals, but eventually enemies. We made a theory about this in the past, I'm just going to throw it in here. I think that this is also the story of Roxy Zebek and Goldie Roger, brothers turned enemies. I also think that this is what would have happened had Ace not died in Marineford. They both cannot become the king of the pirates. They both cannot become the freest person. Eventually, their dreams will make them enemies. Again, I think that this story is also reflected very heavily with the giants of Elbaf. Both Hyrule and Loki cannot become the sun god. If every giant desires to be the sun god, then literally every brother eventually will turn against the other brother. The same as Dory and Brogy. One must crush the other's dream to fulfill their own. As always, keep in mind Shamrock and Shanks, as well as Shanks and Buggy. And additionally, I want you to think about Luffy and Blackbeard. So let's throw some more Japanese lore at you. This time it's of the sun god Amaterasu and the moon god Tsukiyomi, two siblings. I'll spare you the details because the folklore is wacky. But long story short is Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi had a disagreement, leading to Amaterasu telling Tsukiyomi that she would never see him again. This is the event which separated day from night. So while we've speculated that there is a child on Earth that is the descendant, the literal descendant of the sun, I think the same is true of the moon. In a religious context, you could possibly think of these two human characters as Jesus and as the devil, total opposites with fundamentally opposed dreams, a competition to rule mankind. The sun god is a savior who wishes his people to be free, and the devil, or the moon, wishes to conquer it, to become God. From the wisdom of Sun Tzu, an evil man will burn down his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes. So the child of the sun and the child of the moon are not actually brothers, but family is an ambiguous term in One Piece. I think that they became brothers. And the entire Harley texts describe what has happened since the world was cast in darkness, and the devil, or the moon, became God. Through 3 worlds, the devil remains supreme, and the people pray for the return of the sun. But like I said earlier, the sun is not just heaven, the sun is life, and life includes death, and death is not evil. In many Eastern philosophies, death is an integral part of becoming free. So we need a reunion of the sovereign Poseidon, ruler of the underworld, and the sovereign of the sun, ruler of earth, so that together they can help mankind reach heaven, where we will all finally be free. But as we speculated earlier, I think that the problem of the first world is literally the invention of the eternal flame, which I literally think is a flame that was placed into the ocean, feeding off of and destroying the realm of the dragon god of the sea, or the underworld, or the land of the dead. Essentially, guys, the eternal flame was destroying the sea, perhaps literally making it boil, and otherwise dooming the entire planet. And this problem was never solved. So this is my thoughts about how all of this interconnects and makes sense. I hope that it was understandable. I do think that we missed things here or there, like for instance the fragmented moons. You could also potentially look at the various gods, like the god of the earth was enraged, the god of the sea was enraged, as possibly direct foreshadowing of this specific kind of destruction which wreaked havoc on the earth. But if you choose to believe in my interpretation of the prophecy, I feel like I've given you enough here to be able to fill in the blanks as I would kind of see it on your own. Plus all sorts of specific details I think that are still in play. But yeah, guys, I apologize for the bad editing. It was just too long. There was no way that I would be able to edit this in time in order to like give you the video. So I hope what was there is just enough. As always, I'm curious as to what you think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. If you're interested to check out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.